This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Kia ora, and welcome to Diversity Dispatch, your local queer radio show. We're your hosts, Ricky
and Percy, and we're here to bring you the latest in Dunedin queer news, community projects, events, and more.
Sit back, relax, and tune into our fortnightly show hosted on OAR FM.
Let's get started.
Kia ora, and welcome to the next, episode of our wee radio show. So today we thought we would just have a little discussion about our art, and because we're both artists, and and our relationship with sort of art and identity, because the queer community tends to be quite alternative, and I think that the impact of art, in terms of queer history is really significant, and it's interesting to sort of see how our identities and also just sort of our lives have shaped the way that we create and produce things, I guess.
Yeah, I sort of find that neurodivergence, queerness, and creativity sort of coincide with each other.
Yeah, definitely.
They're very closely knit together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I don't know, at least in my case, one of the ways that my neurodivergence was quite really obviously expressed was through art. I was the one in school who would get in trouble for doodling in class and all that sort of stuff. Oh yeah, it's like a universal experience. All of us are just
I sort of used to use it because if this was obviously I didn't have an ADHD diagnosis or anything back then. So I used to find that if I were doodling in either the margins or the back of my book, then that would make my hands or brain busy enough that I could actually listen and take in information.
And concentrate, yeah.
Yeah, the amount of times that my teachers would just call me out and be like, hey, what did I just say? And then I'd repeat it back to them. They're like, well, still don't be drawing. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna. Yeah,
well, I'm going to anyway. Yeah, I don't know, I started doing art stuff really, really young. And I guess I started in sort of the traditional medium because that was the only access that I really had. I didn't know that digital art was a thing that you could do for ages. I think I started with paint, and I did all the NCAA art. Don't recommend it. Painting is hell.
That was a nightmare for me, especially since the main medium that they got you to use was acrylics, and that is probably one of the only mediums that I won't touch.
That's so fair. Acrylics are kind of a hit or miss. I feel they dry too fast.
They do.
They really do. I never got into watercolor though. I really struggle with the blending and stuff, but I have so much respect for people who can work with watercolors. Yeah. That's really hard.
I've spent a lot of time with watercolor, but then I sort of the issues that I had was that the paper would just warp too much, and obviously some people would be like, if you just stretch your paper, I'm like, you want me to soak my whole piece of paper, then tape it down to a surface so I can use it? And I was like, no, let's move on to something else.
Oh yeah, and I'd always have, I don't know if this is something that you experienced, I always had beef with my art teachers. Every year they would have a problem with something I was doing, and I was like, just do not.
There were some years where I was where it was less of an issue, but there were a few years where it really was. I think in year 13, I was made to change my my artboard idea probably 5 times. Yeah. It was it didn't make any sense to me, but
Oh no, neither. And that was one of the sort of issues I had with I guess standardized painting exams, is that art is so subjective, and I don't actually believe that there is any bad art, because it's about the reaction that you have to it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, even with abstract pieces, if it makes you really angry that it's just a dot on a giant blank piece of paper, that's still art.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't personally do it, but I respect the work that's put into it.
Yeah. Because when I used to live in Wellington a couple of years ago, I was taking some fine art portrait painting classes.
Oh,
Why did I bring that up? The pointer had just left my brain.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, and it was real nice.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I guess a really sort of a good sort of opening question would be, what was the first sort of medium that you started working in? Like, not necessarily as like a professional quote unquote artist, but just in general.
Like, to experiment with?
Yeah.
I think definitely initially it was graphite, because that was always readily available.
Yeah.
I still remember the first, like, drawing that I ever did that I felt was, like, successful, and then I started to draw that, like, a million times over again.
Yeah.
So it was this little monster. It was basically a slice of pizza shape, so an upside down triangle, and then it had antennae coming out of its head. It had these, like, cartoon eyes that kind of, like, if you're familiar with Pokemon and, like, Generation 1, like, the Generation 1 eyes.
Right, yeah.
And then it just had, like, stick arms and just, like, an angry mouth, and I was like, that's a monster, Mary.
Hell yeah. I love that. I love that. I think my most, like, vivid memory of deciding that I wanted to get into, like, art was that there was a kid in my class when I was, like, 5, and he was really, really good at drawing, like one of those, like, prodigy type kids. And I was like, I need to be better than him. And that's kind of how it evolved. Yeah.
Rival unlocked.
Oh, exactly. No, I've got such a complex about, like, being an artist and existing in spaces with other artists. It's kind of something that I feel like you have to sort of unlearn, because there's so much competition in, like, the creative industry.
Yeah.
And if you're not the best, it's very difficult to sort of get a foothold anywhere, I find. But yeah, definitely, in, like, high school especially, there's so much, like, competition in, like, the process of creating art, and it kind of put me off it for a while.
Yeah, like, I can definitely relate to that. But also, like, another thing with that is, like, people who have the talent but don't necessarily have the capacity to do it to the extent of other people. Because, like, I'm really happy with where my talent sits, but, like, I typically only do artwork if there's a technique I haven't tried, or if there's a lesson I need to teach myself by doing a piece.
Right.
Yeah, but then it's like, there are people out there who will just do the same thing like 500 million times and be just as happy every time they do it. I am not that person.
Oh god, me neither. Yeah. I have such, like, a wide range of styles, because I can never decide on, like, the one that I want to do consistently. I'm like, oh, I like this, but I also like this one, and I also like this one.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. No, I remember when I was doing theater, when I was, like, a theater kid, my teacher at the time was like, the creative industry is literally just about stealing from other people, essentially. Like, you see something that you like and you go, cool, I'm going to incorporate that into my stuff. And that's essentially how, like, art in, like, the broad sense evolves, I guess.
Yeah, what was that? There's, like, a quote or something. It's like, bad artists steal and great artists steal from many.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that.
No, definitely. I guess, like, sort of another sort of tangent. Were there any like specific artists, or I don't know, like, creative people in general that inspired sort of how your art evolved?
I would say short answer, not really. Which was interesting because, like, especially doing art in high school, there was always, like, this massive focus about, like, oh, you need to do artist studies, you need to, like, find artists that you like, but also here's this massive list of Kiwi artists, and you need to go through and, like, pick them, but also, like, it's not visual. There's no artwork on this. It's just their names. So I never did that, because I was just like, why not? This sounds like a chore.
Yeah, I didn't do it either.
Yeah, but it's like, it wasn't until I was older when I realised, oh, I understand what an artist study is for. Because, like, obviously back in those days, in the classroom, the project wasn't for you to spark a passion for an artist and then incorporate it. It was just, here's some people that, I mean, also just the New Zealand art scene is really saturated with it, like, the exact same stuff, like landscapes. Like, you might see boat sheds with, like, peeling paint on it or something, or, like, hills, or, like, petrified forests. Like, it's all very much
nature-y.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is, like, great if that's your thing, but if you're kind of looking for, because I'm, like, a portrait artist.
So am I.
Yeah, I don't do landscapes. I can't do backgrounds. Please never ask me to do a background.
Do you think we both have that in common? Because it's, like, a landscape, you're just like, I'm painting a cloud. I'm painting a tree now. But with, like, a portrait, you're like, I feel like I'm a fraud and everyone's about to find out. You're like, oh, wait, that worked out. Oh, that's the best piece I've ever done.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then I'm going to, like, not shut up about it for at least, like, a month.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, I'm trying to think of, like, sort of inspirations for me. I would say that, like, probably, this is going to sound so pretentious, but Van Gogh is, like, a really big one. I think it's mostly to do with sort of his struggles with, like, mental illness, and also, like, if you think about, like, the wider context of the paintings that he did, like Starry Night, for example, was painted from his, like, institution window, and so it's the view that he had when he was institutionalized.
Yeah.
And so it kind of gives a whole different flavor to, like, the painting itself, and that sort of thing is the stuff that really sticks with me and sort of influences my art. But I guess also at the same time, like, I mostly just draw my own characters. Like, I don't really have... A lot of my art doesn't really have, like, a story behind it. It's just, I just want to draw this person, like, a million times.
I've sort of, like... My style initially didn't really have much narrative to it, because, like, each time I did a painting, the art was me learning the skill to sort of further my portraiture abilities. And then once it sort of got to a point where I was really happy with it, now I'm like... Well, now it needs a narrative, so now I'm sort of more trying to, like... Yeah, now I'm focusing more on placing figures, like, in space and stuff, and just, like, having, like, a story. Which is, like, if you paint realism, it can be really tricky, because obviously you need to stage the background and stuff, and it's like, if you want to paint things that are, like, real-looking, then you need to sort of focus on, like, light, shadow, and how it, like, reflects and stuff. So typically, the easy way to do it is just to, like, physically make the thing and then just, like, exist in it and take photos. But, like, sometimes it's really tricky when, like, the piece you have in mind is, like, abstract.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm a big fan of the gradient background with nothing else going on. Like,
Love that.
Yeah, it's going to be... That's it. It's a two-dimensional piece. I guess sort of leading on to that, do you think that, like, your sort of experience with understanding your own identity as a queer person had an impact on the way that you sort of made art? I mean, you can say no.
I would probably say no, because I would say that, like, my queer identity sort of came later alongside my my neurodivergence. Like, and I only had that, like, assessed in 2018.
Yeah.
So, like, it wasn't that long ago. Yeah, because it's like, queerness to me is sort of being made to feel other, or knowing that you are other to, like, the status quo.
Yeah.
So, like, I didn't really feel too other, mostly because, like, the struggles that I had, I could mask quite easily.
Yeah.
Or I just was masking because of, like, the environments or, like, the work types that I would be taking on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with, I kind of feel the same way, in terms of, like, I feel like my queer identity and being, like, neurodivergent are a lot more closely linked together. But I also think, I know that, like, a lot of the sort of subject matter that I've decided on making in terms of my art has really evolved over the years, and it's been, like, heavily influenced by the way that I understood myself. I mean, I think in particular, I'm really, like, I can't do, like, self-portraits. I really struggle to paint myself. And one of the things that sort of got me past the threshold of I'm not allowed to paint myself was seeing other, like, trans artists in particular, like, doing art of themselves, especially, like, figure studies, nude studies, stuff like that, where it's like you're just looking at the body as an artistic piece. It's not got any societal connotations around it. And so kind of it played a really major role in, like, accepting the way I was, and not only accepting it, but actually, like, celebrating it and being able to portray it in a way that was artistic and that other people would look at it and go, that's beautiful, you know? And that wasn't something that I was getting in, like, my social life. And so through art, I was sort of able to come to terms in a way with the person that I was, and I guess my gender identity as well. Yeah.
I love that.
Oh, yeah, no, I think it's been, like... I don't know, like, I've never really wanted to be, like, a career sort of artist. Like, I
agree. I feel the exact same way.
I think the moment that you start getting paid, I feel like there's, like, a shift sort of in the...
Or once the like the reason for you to do the artwork has changed from I'm really excited to I need this to be done so that I can get the reward.
Yeah, and I need to like pay my rent or buy groceries or whatever, and then you kind of lose sight of the
passion starts to dwindle.
No, definitely. And that's like my worst fear is that, you know, the stuff that I'm really passionate about is going to turn into some like career driven sort of like financial based thing. Yeah, so I've tried to keep like my art really, really, really separate from all of the like I guess jobs that I've had. Although I would love to work as like a concept artist or something like that. I think that would be really fun.
If anyone's listening. Before, when you said that you typically didn't paint portraits, I mean self-portraits. I typically paint self-portraits mostly just because like if I need like a subject, I can just take a photo and it's really convenient. But in saying that, like, so my art studio has lots of like self-portraits there, and I had somebody come over for like a visit, and they sort of looked around, and they're like, "Wow, I guess you're like Squidward then, aren't you?" And I was like,
"Oh no!"
Yeah, so apparently I'm Squidward.
Not the worst comparison, but definitely not up there.
I mean, he's definitely a bit old artistic gay, like.
Yeah, that man's very queer-coded.
Oh, for sure.
I love that we've, like, just devolved into Squidward gay.
Oh, for sure. Also SpongeBob, also Patrick. Wait,
the whole cast.
Is Patrick asexual?
I mean, he's...
Starfish?
He's a starfish, so I don't know... I don't know enough about starfish biology to comment on that, but...
No, I think there's been, like, I think they've exploded, and there's an ocean somewhere where like starfish have just taken over and they've just overpopulated it, and now it's like awful, so people are being encouraged to catch them.
Yeah, I heard something about that as well. Same with like lionfish, I think it was.
Yeah. Those fish be lying.
I'm trying to think of like sort of other questions, I guess, that we can sort of...
Well, so I was thinking we could talk a little bit about drag and the way that it sort of evolved over the last few years, because obviously drag is one of the prominent forms of creative like gender expression.
Yeah, absolutely.
And definitely like when I was in high school, what I thought drag was then versus even just like 5 or 10 years after that. Like obviously RuPaul's Drag Race has changed the game for a lot of people.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, they also definitely steered drag in one very specific direction that sort of like initially everyone was like, this is great and exciting and it's fresh and new, but then once it was just continuations of pretty much the exact same thing, everyone's like and then obviously there was Dragula, which is one of my absolute favorite shows because it's like there are 3 main categories: filth, glamour, and horror.
Ooh, okay.
So like there's a lot of like blood and guts, fake of course, and then just like prosthetics and just it hits different because it's more so instead of just being like, I made myself a nice little gown to wear to a cocktail party. It's very like, oh, I'm just this interdimensional creature with like tentacles that's like covered in blood because like takes all its like victims and like it's that kind of stuff. I love that.
Yeah, I really think that like this is going to be a like really bizarre comparison, but I think that RuPaul's Drag Race is like the Hamilton of drag in that just let me explain in that it kind of brought the genre into like sort of the pop culture spotlight, and I guess sort of brought it out of its like niche so that it became a lot of people are a lot more like if you talk to some random person on the street, they're probably going to know what RuPaul's Drag Race is. Like they may not have watched it, but they've definitely heard of it. And in the same way that like Hamilton in the musical genre kind of brought, I guess, like non-white in particular music like subgenres into sort of the spotlight. And so even though we can sort of look at these like really popular shows and go, oh, it's a little bit cringe, I think that like historically they have a pretty significant role in terms of like normalizing these ideas of gender expression. Yeah.
So like even though there's a very specific type of drag that's being showcased, like it has done like it's expanded so many different things. Like I hadn't seen any drag up until like that show in particular, like a little bit like Priscilla, Queen of the Desert type stuff. But yeah, like bringing it to the mainstream, and now we're seeing it like pop up here in Dunedin.
Yeah. I also got like really excited about on like RuPaul's Drag Race in particular, seeing like more trans queens and kings, because I think that there's like a pretty big like cognitive dissonance between like gender expression in drag versus gender expression in like a trans sense.
Yeah.
And mixing the two together, I thought was awesome, and I wish that they kind of did that more. Won't comment on my opinions on RuPaul. That's a separate discussion.
So I was thinking, like, there's a lot of confusion, especially, like, in the US. There's a lot of confusion between what a trans person is and what a drag queen is.
Yes.
And I'm sort of thinking, like, probably a better way to describe, like, a drag artist is exactly that. Because, like, by saying drag artist, you are saying that it's an activity, it's an expression, it's a medium.
Yeah.
But if you say that you're like a drag queen, then you're personifying it. So then I think a lot of people who don't see a lot of drag will be like, oh, that's them. That's not like a version of them that's only temporary.
Right, yeah. There's a really, really common like rhetoric, especially overseas in the States, that like drag, especially drag queens, are quote unquote fetishizing women or whatever. And I've seen that a lot, and
Which
I'm
is
like,
quite funny, except no, I'd say straight men are fetishizing women.
yeah, I'm like, maybe check yourself before you start throwing accusations out there.
Absolutely. It's like, but also like, I suppose there's a lot of like music videos and stuff that, there's that like the gays will be like, oh my god, queen, because like obviously they'll be like the videos will be catering towards like probably more of a heteronormative audience, but like the guys are just like, yes, come through, hi fam.
It's that whole thing of like, if the person is not fitting exactly into sort of the like preconceived stereotype that we have in our heads of what a drag queen, for example, is supposed to look like, they're not going to show that on like popular television because that challenges the status quo, God forbid.
I think there's a lot of like the discussions around drag queens and trans people.
Yeah.
It's definitely being weaponized. Like
yes.
I think that's almost the only reason it's come up recently. Because like, things were relatively quiet for a while there, but now it's more so, it's like a lot of political leverage and stuff.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, like, just because I'm really into sort of like queer history and stuff, I think that is really closely connected. Because if you look at like the early 2000s, there was that period of like really intense but low key, like under the radar homophobia, like calling everything gay and blah, blah, blah. And I think that like at that time, like queer identity and drag in particular was very, very niche. Like it was really like you needed to know the right people and go to the right venues in order to be able to like experience it, I think. And now that it's with RuPaul's Drag Race and other shows like that, it's kind of been propelled into this like, okay, now this is like somewhat like culturally acceptable to a certain degree, obviously, because, we live in a bubble and, and then because of that, there's been a lot more sort of discussions of like the intricacies of drag versus gender expression versus art versus costume versus, And so like it's kind of a double-edged sword in that it's created a really interesting space to explore gender, and also I think has opened the door for like straight cis people to kind of dabble in gender exploration to some degree.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like obviously all the straights that come to all the like drag gigs and stuff, like everyone's welcome as long as nobody's problematic towards anyone.
Yeah.
And that's the same with the queer community as well, because there's a lot of that too. So
there's an interesting sort of divide, I think, between the queer community in that a lot of us are kind of going like, we actually do not care who's in here as long as you're respectful and don't like aren't a crappy person to other people. Yeah. But then there's sort of an equal amount of people who are completely against that and are like, no, like we have a history, we have a really intricate, important history, and a lot of that is around sort of the politics of identity. And I kind of wish there was like a middle ground where we can sort of respect other people and also acknowledge that, like, you know, certain labels and certain ways of existing in the queer community are really significant to our history and, you know, need to be acknowledged as sort of part of that.
Because it's like, it's interesting that you touch on the, there's kind of like an obsession with like labels and stuff.
Yeah.
Which, like, I can see from the point of view of like an older generation person being like, well, we didn't have any of those back in our day and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, I think when people find a label that feels good to them, and once they sort of relate it to themselves, they can then defend themselves, like, based on, like, their own understanding of how they are now.
They can articulate, like, what they're feeling with specific words, you know? I really agree with that. I think that, I see a lot of people just really, really, really shooting down sort of the idea of micro-identities and stuff like that. And it's like, just let people call themselves what they want. It doesn't matter. And also, like, I don't know, for me at least, the sort of process of choosing labels and finding, like, the right one that sort of fit for me was also, like, I started off with all of these, like, really, really specific identities, and then I sort of pulled back a little bit and was just like, oh yeah, I'm just a trans bisexual man, and just left it there. And it's one of those things where it's like, with other queer people, I'll go into like really like detail, but when I talk to like cis straight people, it's like talking to a baby, you know? Like, I feel like I'm explaining like gender theory to a toddler, you know?
You're like, you can like two genders at the same time.
Yeah, right. Like, I feel like I have to baby talk and like kind of hold people's hands. And so I think that there is like a certain degree of power in choosing what you want to call yourself.
Absolutely. And you get to just like defend it. Once you have it, you can just defend it into the ground, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're about to run out of time, so we might wrap up this sort of episode now. But thank you so much for listening.
Yeah,
and
thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, and hopefully we will see you in the next one.
Yeah, bye, Chookies.
Bye.
And that's a wrap for today. Diversity Dispatch airs fortnightly on Thursdays at 5 p.m. So if you like today's episode, then be sure to join us in a couple of weeks for the next installment on OAR FM.
And check out the podcast on oar.org.nz and your favourite podcast platforms. Tune in for more chill chats, fun facts, and upcoming local events on Diversity Dispatch.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.